Okay, we've gone through, as my regulars will know, a few of these people who support man-made climate change and CO2 drives the climate nonsense. Okay, they're all lefties, but they basically fall into two categories. Oh, what's wrong with this? Oh, that's better. I've divided them into two categories. On the left, we've got the useful idiots, prominent in this area: Suzuki, Noam Chomsky, Bill Nye, the bullshit guy, John Cook, skeptical science infamy, and 97% consensus tripe, Michio Kaku. Now, these are ones that really don't know the science, even though they might be scientists, but they don't know the science, and they're all lefties, of course, as you'd expect. On this side, we've got a number of scientists who are categorized as misled lefties who should know better than to say what they're saying. Brian Cox, he learnt something last year when he spouted a lot of nonsense on the ABC TV. He's kept fairly quiet since then. Lawrence Krauss, he's an American who's talked a whole lot of crap about climate. He's another astrophysicist, but doesn't mind stepping way out of his field. And you've got Gavin Schmidt, who is the current head of GIS, has no qualifications in climate or any science whatsoever. So how he became the head of GIS, I've got no idea. And there's James Hansen, who's left that job that Schmidt occupies now to become a full-fledged fanatic. And Hansen, of course, is the guy who got his PhD through saying that, Venus is hot because of the greenhouse effect of CO2. So this is, all of a muchness, these guys. Neil deGrasse Tyson has joined that list. He's made it. Well done. Let's hear what Tyson has to say about climate change.
Yeah, as I've said before, the good thing about science, when a consensus of experiment emerges, the good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it. And climate change has taken on political dimensions, it's taken on cultural, social dimensions. And that's odd because I don't see people choosing sides over E equals MC squared or other fundamental facts of science. But the experimental consensus is there, that human beings, by virtue of our conduct, burning sources of carbon, fossil fuels among them, that have been buried for millions of years. We burn them, carbon previously underground is now in the atmosphere, and that source of carbon makes carbon dioxide. A greenhouse gas is warming the earth.
Okay, Tyson made 3 points here. Number one, it's a fundamental fact of science that our carbon dioxide is heating the planet dangerously. Second point he made there is that the consensus is there. And the third point he made is that the CO2 we are now releasing is warming the earth. It's quite interesting to hear what these people say. Now, the claim that our CO2 heating the planet dangerously, in inverted commas, is a fundamental fact of science is quite amazing. I mean, it's trying to equate it to E equals MC squared, or that the earth is round, or that gravity keeps us from flying off into space. Those are fundamental facts of science. Now, that our CO2 is heating the planet dangerously, I don't know how we can say that when it's never been quantified, never been measured. Not even any warming's been measured from CO2. So that's ridiculous. And the second one, a scientific consensus is there. Well, there was a scientific consensus for decades that stomach acids gave you stomach ulcers. That was shown to be completely wrong. There was a scientific consensus for decades that the expansion of the universe was slowing down. And you subscribe to that, Mr. deGrasse Tyson. Oh, Dr. deGrasse Tyson, sorry. So scientific consensuses are quite often wrong, and in any case, that is not the way that science is done. It's not done on, it's not determined by consensus. Politics is determined by consensus. Your mate there, standing next to you, Barack Obama, he would be happy with a consensus because he's a politician. That's not the way science is done, my friend. And number 3, the CO2 we are now releasing is warming the Earth. That's just an assertion which has got no basis in fact. Where's the evidence? Where's the scientific paper that's measured it, that's quantified it? Doesn't exist. There's no such paper. So there's no evidence, no real evidence that CO2 we are now releasing is warming the Earth. There is a paper that's measured forcing, a forcing of 0.2 watts per square meter per decade from the extra CO2, but there's definitely no proof that that is increasing, that is warming the atmosphere, causing global warming. There's no paper, no measurement, and no quantification of that at all in the literature. So all 3 of these assertions can be just thrown out as being nonsense.
What happens is we're changing the climate faster than our culture may be able to respond. One of the consequences is you melt ice caps, the water levels rise. Not inches, not feet, but tens of feet. And that will begin to flood coastlines. Some of the most important cities in the world were built on coastlines for the very reason that that's how you accomplish trade. It's what made those ports successful. So the very foundation of our civilization requires coastlines that existed at a time when there was not global climate change, the kind that would be warming the Earth. So get ready for that. It's going to redraw the maps of the world, unless we do something about it.
Yeah, here Tyson swallowed the official line, hook, line and sinker, and basically swallowed the rod and the fisherman as well. He's made 4 assertions here in about 2 minutes. We are changing the climate faster, and secondly, is predicting tens of feet of sea level rise. Thirdly, is saying that global climate change warming the Earth has not been warming the Earth substantially in recent history. And fourthly, unless we do something about it. So he's claiming that we can do something about all these disastrous effects that he's predicting. Assertion 1 and 3 are probably the same. So he's saying we are changing the climate faster. And global climate change is warming the Earth faster than any time in recent history. Well, there's no evidence for that. The models say that the climate is changing faster. And the models say that climate change in the future is going to be faster. But that's not what's happening. The models have been completely wrong. And why are they wrong? Because the forcings are wrong. They've got the relative forcings wrong in this chart here from AR5, from the IPCC's AR5. Let's look at a bit of context. This will tell us a lot more. This is the climate change or warming and cooling over the last 65 million years. For most of that time, it's been a lot warmer than it is now. It's only in the last, say, 14, 15 million years that it's started cooling dramatically. It's been at least 4 to 12 degrees warmer than it is now over the last 65 million years. And if we look over the last 5 million years, climate change has been rapid, dramatic, and enormous, spanning 12 degrees centigrade, going up and down very rapidly. Over the last 2-3 million years, it's been going up and down 10 degrees centigrade, measured in the Antarctic. And over a shorter time period, let's go back just the last 2,000 years. This is from Lowell, 2007. Again, he shows nothing unusual in the last, 40, 50 years. Absolutely nothing unusual. Temperature's been going up in the Roman warm period, up down in the Dark Ages, up in the Medieval warm period, down in the Little Ice Age, and up in the modern warm period. So nothing unusual at all. Then if we look at the longest temperature record we have anywhere in the world, is a CET, Central England Air Temperature record, started in 1659 and is still being measured today. Where's the rapid, unusual climate change and global warming? Where is it? It's not there. In fact, from the most rapid warming was from 1680 to 1730, as you can see there. That was a big change, much bigger than anything we've got today. And as many of us know who are not wedded to this CO2 drives the climate nonsense, the climate change on Earth is actually driven by a very large number of cycles, climate cycles. A lot of them are astronomical and solar or planetary driven cycles. Here's one, for example, and it's quite visible in the Hadkrut 3 temperature record since 1850. It's the 61-year solar barycenter cycle, which is a Yoshimura cycle. This has been known for decades, apparently not by the IPCC though, or so-called mainstream climate scientists. Now we've also had a lot of solar activity recently, driven again by longer solar cycles than the Yoshimura. This is the Buie, 2300-year cycle. And we've recently had, in the last half of the 20th century, the highest solar activity for 11,000 years from this paper. Other papers say 4,000 years, but in any case, it's been a very long time since solar activity has been this high. Here we've got the sunspot number by over the last 2,000 years by Ledecky, 2011. Massive increase in the last, since the Little Ice Age ended, 1690. Massive increase. And similarly for the C14 isotope proxy for GCR flux, or solar activity if you like, bottomed out 1690 at the modern minimum. Enormous massive increase to the modern maximum. Here we've got work by Herrera 2015, which shows solar activity, TSI in fact, measured in TSI. Big variability, about 10 watts per square meter variability in TSI over the last few hundred years. And just over the last 100 years, this is the magnitude of Neptune. So, and you can see just from the rise from 1910 to 1940, and then a fall to 1975, and then a rise to the current period, 2000-2010. Everyone will know, who knows anything about climate change, that matches up exactly with the temperature record on Earth, the Hadkrut 3, Hadkrut 4, and the balloon measurements. Now, one of the big arguments of CO2 advocates has always been that the global warming post-1960 must have been caused by CO2 because solar activity has fallen since then. But we can see here from the planets, photometry from Neptune, from TSI, shown here. This is a paper by Shromsky, 2003, and also solar UV flux proxy. Shows it going up, so it shows these solar proxies going up from 1960 to 2000, along with the magnitude of Neptune. And we've also seen big changes in Pluto's atmosphere in this period. And this is a paper by Buie, 2002. He actually calls it remarkable changes, where the surface pressure, surface atmospheric pressure on Pluto has doubled. And according to Fenton, Glacier and Haberl, 2006, Mars has also seen accelerated melting of the southern polar ice cap. I think I've pretty well dealt with questions 1 and 3. Although I'll just give one more reference. This is from Liu, 2011, which is measurements in the Tibetan Plateau, showing the cyclic nature of climate change. clearly shows the medieval warm period, the Little Ice Age, and the current warming period. And using these cycles, Liu et al. Are predicting a sudden fall in temperatures from now until 2068. So now we'll look at Neil deGrasse Tyson's perhaps most fretted about change, which is tens of feet of sea level rise to our cities, our coast, inundating our coastal cities. New York, London, Shanghai, Sydney, all gone. I mean, this is crazy because such an inundation, if it ever does happen, such a sea level rise, if it ever does happen, will not be for probably millennia, and certainly not for many centuries. So the cities won't be there anyway in that length of time. So anyway, let's look into this a little bit more. Now, it's claiming that, of course, our CO2 is causing all this warming of the oceans. So here's a paper by Cohenberg, 2004, which says that CO2, measured by plant stomata, was over 400 parts per million just 1,500 years ago. So, in other words, the ice core record of CO2 might be totally wrong. So if this is the case, of course, the rise in CO2 over the last century or so is mostly not anthropogenic. Secondly, we've got a paper by Clough and Iacono, 1995, which measured the actual cooling or warming supposedly caused by CO2 in the atmosphere. And in the troposphere, as you see here, up to 100 millibars, or 0.1 bar if you like, there's no warming or cooling caused by CO2 in the troposphere. But above the troposphere, the stratosphere, and the mesosphere, there's a very strong cooling caused by CO2. So there's no record of warming anywhere in any scientific paper. I've never seen one that shows CO2 causing any warming. Where are they? And here, even if CO2 did cause warming, and even if the CO2 was ours, then it couldn't heat the oceans, because the back radiation comes down at 10 microns here. Oceans do not absorb wavelengths of radiation at that wavelength. So the absorption is only measured in a few microns. Here, where you've got visible radiation from the sun coming in, insolation, that goes down hundreds of meters into the oceans. But at 10 microns, which is the wavelength of long-wave back radiation, supposedly from CO2, there it is. The ocean doesn't absorb it. So back radiation from CO2 cannot heat the oceans. And if you're still not convinced, have a look at my video, Crock of the Century. A big sea level rise from CO2 can't happen. That details why we cannot get a big sea level rise due to our CO2. So all detailed there with many references to the literature.
Venus suffers from a runaway greenhouse effect. It's 900 degrees on Venus, not simply because it's closer to the sun than us. It's not that much closer. It's a little bit closer. It's got nearly 100% CO2 in its atmosphere, and that atmosphere is 100 times as dense as ours. So heat comes in, it does not come out, and the temperature rises. I don't want Earth to look like Venus. Hi, I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm an astronaut.
Did he just say, hello, I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson and I'm an ass? Well, if he thinks Venus is hot because of the greenhouse effect of CO2, he is an ass. Okay, a little thought will bring even the non-expert to agree that Venus is not hot because of the greenhouse effect of CO2. The greenhouse effect works by short-wave radiation hitting the surface and then being re-radiated as long-wave, which is then trapped by the greenhouse gas, CO2. And then downwelling radiation comes from that. Okay, firstly, in the case of Venus, very little or no of the sun's radiation even reaches the surface of Venus, not direct insolation anyway. Maybe some scattered radiation reaches the surface, according to this paper here, due to its opaque atmosphere. Secondly, Venus has a long day of 117 of our days, so its night lasts 58 Earth days. And yet, during all this long 58 Earth day night, the temperature of the Venusian atmosphere is maintained. So there's virtually no real difference in temperature between the day and the night. How can that be? How can you get a greenhouse effect when it's nighttime, when there's no sun to provide the insulation that you need for the greenhouse effect? The critical pressure of CO2 is 7,380 kilopascals, and the critical temperature is 30 centigrade. So CO2 on the Venusian surface is not a gas. It's a supercritical fluid. It becomes a supercritical fluid at the height of 4 kilometers above the surface of Venus, according to my calculations. So the top 4, or the bottom 4, if you like, 4 kilometers of the Venusian atmosphere is not even a gas. It's a supercritical fluid. It's hard to say whether a supercritical fluid can cause a greenhouse effect. It's very unlikely. Now, given that the bottom 4 kilometers of the Venusian atmosphere is a supercritical fluid, the first question you might ask is, can a highly compressed and superheated supercritical fluid that is more like an ocean than a gas still possess the greenhouse properties of an ordinary atmospheric gas? This is pretty unlikely. It's true that fermions, of which CO2 is made when highly compressed, increase the width of their absorption emission bands because of the Pauli exclusion principle. Prevents fermions from being in the same state and in the same place at the same time. So whether this factor has affected the surface supercritical fluid enough to create a gas-like greenhouse effect is really unknown at present. It seems much more likely that it's back to the ideal gas law. And that's shown by inputting the 3 parameters: gas density, gas pressure, molecular weight, and we get the temperature. We get the temperature of Venus. So why try to make up something about a greenhouse effect? What's the reason? When it's, it just doesn't make any thermodynamic sense. Thank you so much for sticking through to the end and for your attention.